The shack sits at the boundary of acceptance. Behind it, dense woodland stretches into territories where pack law still holds meaning, where wolves run free beneath silver moons and the old hierarchies remain unbroken. Before it, the settlement sprawls in organized chaos, all wooden structures and suspicious glances. A place that tolerates Scotty Sampson's existence only because forgetting him entirely proves impossible. Scott has inhabited this marginal existence for 26 years, long enough that he sometimes wonders if he ever truly knew what belonging felt like. Perhaps that's a mercy. The pre-dawn darkness still clings to the world when he rises, his body trained to wake before the settlement stirs. His movements are practiced in their quietness, economical, designed to disturb nothing and no one. Dark hair falls across eyes that have learned to look without being seen, to observe the invisible currents that flow beneath the surface of reality. The threadbare shirt and worn trousers he wears have been mended countless times, patches upon patches, the garments of someone who expects nothing and asks for less. The visions always come at night. They started 3 weeks ago, faint at first. Flashes of crimson light. The echo of a howl that wasn't quite sound, but something felt deep in his bones. Scott had tried to ignore them, the way he'd learned to ignore so many things about himself. But visions like these don't fade with denial. They grow. Last night, the vision had been so vivid he'd woken gasping, his chest tight with a terror that wasn't entirely his own. He'd seen her clearly for the first time, towering, powerful, her body marked with runes that burned like brands, glowing an angry red against skin that seemed to writhe with barely contained fury. Her eyes, molten gold and utterly inhuman, had locked onto his across the impossible distance of the vision. Then she'd begun to change, bones cracking and reforming, humanity sliding away into something monstrous and uncontrollable. The scream that had torn from her throat still echoes in his memory. Scott moves through the settlement's outskirts as the sun breaks over the horizon, heading toward the small garden plot he maintains. It's meager work, but it keeps him fed, keeps him useful enough that the pack tolerates his continued presence. His bare feet leave prints in the morning dew, the only evidence that he exists at all. The gift manifested when he was 7. A pack member had died, old Marcus, who'd lived long past his expected years. The funeral had drawn everyone, a solemn affair where warriors spoke of strength and service. Scott had stood at the back with the other children, silent and still. But while everyone else saw only the shrouded body, Scott had seen Marcus himself, translucent and confused, standing beside his own corpse and trying to understand why no one would answer him. Scott had whispered to him without thinking. "You're gone, sir." "You have to let go now." Marcus's spirit had turned to him, relief flooding those ghostly features. "I can't find the way." "I'll show you." And Scott had hummed a melody he'd never learned, words rising from somewhere deep and ancient within him, a language of transitions and thresholds. The spirit had faded peacefully, gratitude in his final glance. Everyone else had seen a child talking to empty air and singing in tongues. The pack elders had convened immediately. Tests were administered, some gentle, others less so. His father, a low-ranking pack member whose greatest pride had been his normalcy, had stood frozen while they debated. Some whispered that Scott carried old bloodlines, that curse-breaking was a gift nearly extinct among their kind. Others insisted he was touched by something darker, dangerous, a corruption waiting to spread. Fear, as always, proved more persuasive than wonder. They didn't exile him. That would have required acknowledging him as someone worth formal banishment. Instead, they simply withdrew. Parents kept their children away. Wolves crossed to the other side of paths when they scented him approaching. Even his own father had grown distant, his disappointment a weight Scott learned to carry alongside his gift. The isolation would have destroyed him if not for the spirits themselves. The dead, at least, didn't fear him. They sought him out, drawn to the only living soul who could perceive them. He helped where he could, confused ghosts who couldn't find their rest, bound spirits trapped by unfinished business, the echoes of violence that clung to blood-soaked ground. He worked in secret, always in secret, helping them cross over with his songs and rituals. It was enough. It had to be enough. But these new visions are different. Scott crouches in his garden, pulling weeds with mechanical precision, but his mind is elsewhere. The visions aren't like the spirits he usually encounters. Those are stationary, bound to specific places or people. These visions reach across distance to find him, invasive and urgent. They're not asking for his help, they're demanding it. And the woman in the visions, Scott has never felt power like hers, not even among the pack's strongest alphas. It radiates from her like heat from a forge, barely contained, barely controlled. The curse wrapped around her is equally massive, an ancient working of tremendous complexity. He can sense its architecture even through the fragmented images, layer upon layer of binding magic, punishment magic, transformation magic, all woven together into something that's slowly consuming her from within. She's dying, he realizes with sudden clarity. Maybe not her body, not yet, but her humanity. The curse is transforming her into something that can never be human again, erasing who she is piece by piece with every blood moon that rises. The certainty settles over him like a shroud. If he doesn't act, she'll be lost completely. And somehow, impossibly, he's the only one who can see it happening. You look terrible. Scott startles, nearly dropping the weeds he's gathered. Mira stands at the edge of his garden, one of the few pack members who still acknowledges his existence. She's young, barely 18, and hasn't yet learned that speaking to him marks her as strange by association. Didn't sleep well? He manages, keeping his voice neutral. Clearly. She tilts her head, studying him with uncomfortable perception. You look like you've seen a ghost. More than usual, I mean. The irony would be funny if it didn't cut so close to truth. Just tired. Mira doesn't look convinced, but she doesn't push. Instead, she crouches beside him, helping pull weeds without being asked. They work in companionable silence for several minutes before she speaks again. Did you hear? There's news from the Northern Territories. Something about pack leader Leaper. Scott's hands still. What kind of news? Preparations for another blood moon ceremony. Apparently, they're taking extra precautions this time. Mira's voice drops lower, though there's no one nearby to overhear. There are rumors the curse is getting worse, that she nearly killed 3 of her own warriors during the last transformation. The words hit Scott like a physical blow. Talmadge Leaper. He's heard the name before, spoken with equal parts fear and respect. The pack leader who rules the Northern Territories with an iron fist, who's held her position for a decade despite being cursed. He'd never connected her to the woman in his visions, but now that the name is spoken aloud, the recognition clicks into place with devastating certainty. When? The word comes out hoarse. When is the next blood moon? Mira glances at the sky as though the answer might be written there. 3 days, maybe 4. 3 days. Scott's pulse quickens. The visions have been building towards something, and now he knows what. The blood moon. The transformation. If the curse is worsening, if Talmadge Leaper is losing more of herself with each cycle, then this next one might be the point of no return. Scott? Mira is watching him with concern. You okay? You just went completely pale. Fine. He forces himself to resume pulling weeds, though his hands shake slightly. Just surprised. I didn't realize it was so soon. She doesn't believe him. He can see it in her face. But she has the grace not to call him a liar. They finish the weeding in silence, and when Mira finally leaves, Scott remains crouched in the dirt, staring at nothing. 3 days. He closes his eyes and the vision rises immediately, as though it's been waiting for his attention. Talmadge Leaper stands in what looks like a stone courtyard, her body already beginning to glow with those terrible crimson runes. She's surrounded by warriors in defensive positions, chains prepared, weapons ready. She looks at them with eyes that are already more wolf than human, and Scott feels her resignation like a knife to his chest. She's accepted this as her fate. She believes there's no escape from what she's becoming, but Scott can see what others can't. He can trace the curse's structure through the vision, following its threads back to their source. It's anchored to something external, something that can be broken if only someone knows where to look. The curse wasn't born from her. It was inflicted upon her, which means it can be removed. He's never attempted anything like this before. Breaking minor hauntings, guiding confused spirits, unraveling small hexes placed by amateur practitioners, these are within his capabilities. But a curse of this magnitude, one that's been building power for a decade, it could kill him. Probably will kill him. Scott opens his eyes and looks down at his dirt-stained hands, these hands that have spent 26 years making themselves useful in the smallest possible ways, never drawing attention, never claiming space or importance. If he does nothing, Talmadge Leaper will lose herself completely. The Northern Territories will fall into chaos, and he'll continue his quiet existence, safe and unnoticed and completely irrelevant. If he acts, he'll likely die. But even the attempt might give her a chance. The choice should be harder than it is. Scott rises from his garden, brushing dirt from his knees. The settlement is waking fully now, voices carrying on the morning air, the daily routines beginning. No one looks his way. No one ever does. He walks back to his shack, mind already racing through what he'll need. The old ritual components his grandmother left him before she died. The ones he's been too afraid to use. The songs she taught him in secret. The forbidden melodies that open doors between worlds. And courage. He'll need courage most of all. The visions pulse at the edge of his awareness, urgent and demanding. 3 days until the blood moon. 3 days to reach the Northern Territories. 3 days to attempt the impossible. Scott begins gathering his supplies, hands steady despite the fear coiling in his gut. He spent his entire life being invisible, powerless, barely tolerated. Maybe it's time to discover what he actually is beneath all that enforced smallness. Maybe it's time to step forward, even if it kills him. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story, just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, back to the story. The decision to leave comes easier than the actual leaving. Scott waits until nightfall, when the settlement has quieted and the chances of being questioned drop to near zero. He moves through his shack with practiced efficiency, gathering the few items that matter. His grandmother's leather pouch, worn soft with age, containing dried herbs whose names he only half remembers. A knife with a bone handle, useless for fighting, but essential for ritual work. The tattered journal where she'd written instructions in cramped, fading script. Half recipe book, half grimoire. All secrets. He wraps everything in a dark cloak that's seen better years and straps the bundle across his back. His hands pause on the small wooden figurine sitting on the windowsill. A wolf his father carved for him when Scott was 5, before the gift manifested and ruined everything. He stares at it for a long moment, then leaves it behind. Some things belong to the past. The vision hits him the moment he steps outside. It slams into his consciousness with the force of a physical blow, dropping him to his knees in the dirt. The world around him vanishes, replaced by the courtyard he's seen a dozen times before. But this time he's not watching from a distance. He's inside it, experiencing it as though through Talmadge Leaper's own senses. Pain, searing, unbearable pain radiating from every point where the crimson runes burn into flesh. Scott gasps, his body convulsing, though he knows intellectually that the pain isn't his. The curse is activating, responding to the pull of the blood moon still days away, and it's tearing through Talmadge's body like fire through dry timber. He sees through her eyes as the warriors around her step back, fear evident in their faces despite their training. Sees her own hands beginning to change, fingers elongating into claws, skin splitting to accommodate the transformation forcing itself upon her. Feels her desperate attempt to hold on to her humanity, to remember who she is beneath the monster the curse is creating. Then her thoughts break through, fragmented but clear. Not again. I can't do this again. Please, not again. The vision releases him as suddenly as it seized him, and Scott collapses forward, his palms scraping against rough ground. He's shaking, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and for several seconds he can't remember where he is or why he's on his knees in the dirt. The Northern Territories. He has to reach the Northern Territories. Scott forces himself upright, using the side of his shack for support. His legs feel weak, his head spinning from the intensity of what he just experienced. The visions have never been this visceral before, never pushed him directly into someone else's suffering. The curse must be accelerating, building toward some critical threshold. 3 days suddenly seems impossibly short. He sets off into the darkness, following the northern road that traders sometimes use. The settlement disappears behind him quickly, swallowed by the night and the forest that presses close on either side. Scott has never traveled this far from home before. The farthest he's ventured was to the next settlement over, and that was years ago, before his reputation spread far enough to make even brief excursions uncomfortable. Now he's heading toward territory he only knows from stories, toward a pack leader whose power is legendary, and whose curse is apparently killing her by degrees. The rational part of his mind insists this is suicide, the part that's been shaped by visions and spirits, and the weight of his grandmother's teachings knows it's the only choice that matters. The road stretches ahead, pale in the moonlight. Scott walks it alone, his shadow long and thin behind him, and tries not to think about how small he is compared to what he's moving toward. Tries not to imagine what Talmadge Leaper will do when a powerless Omega appears at her fortress, claiming he can break a curse that's defeated every powerful practitioner in the territories. Tries not to wonder if the visions are leading him toward salvation, or just a more meaningful death than the slow fade of his invisible existence. The night deepens. Scott walks. And with every step, the pull grows stronger, a golden thread connecting his chest to something vast and burning in the north, reeling him in whether he's ready or not. Scott reaches the Northern Territories as the sun bleeds into the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red that make his stomach clench with recognition. The blood moon is rising tonight, earlier than Mira predicted. He can feel it in the air, a pressure building like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. The fortress rises from the landscape like a threat made solid. Dark stone walls that seem to absorb light rather than reflect it. Towers that pierce the darkening sky like claws. Warriors patrol the perimeter, their movements sharp and coordinated, but there's tension in every line of their bodies. They're preparing for something. Scott approaches the main gate, his travel-worn appearance drawing immediate attention. 3 warriors intercept him before he's within 50 feet of the entrance, weapons drawn but not yet pointed. The largest, a woman with a scar bisecting her left eyebrow, looks him over with undisguised skepticism. "State your business, Omega." The word carries its usual weight of dismissal, but Scott has no energy left for shame. He's walked for 3 days with minimal rest, driven by visions that grew more intense with each passing mile. "I need to see Pack Leader Leaper." The warriors exchange glances. One of them actually laughs. The pack leader doesn't take visitors, especially not tonight. I know what tonight is. Scott keeps his voice steady despite the exhaustion dragging at his bones. That's why I'm here. I can help her. Help her? The scarred warrior steps closer, her expression shifting from skepticism to something darker. You think you can help where every healer and shaman in the territories has failed? What are you, some kind of miracle worker? I'm a curse breaker. The words feel too large for his mouth, too presumptuous for someone like him to claim. I see curses, I can... A howl cuts through the air, raw and agonized, and every warrior freezes. It's not quite human and not quite wolf, something caught between that makes Scott's skin crawl with recognition. He's heard that sound in his visions 100 times, but hearing it in reality is different. Worse. The scarred warrior curses under her breath. It's starting. Get him out of here, we don't have time. No. Scott pushes past her, or tries to. She catches his arm effortlessly, her grip iron strong. Let me go! I have to... Another howl, closer now, followed by the sound of chains rattling and voices shouting commands. The courtyard beyond the gate has erupted into controlled chaos, warriors moving with practiced precision toward whatever is happening at its center. Scott doesn't think. He wrenches free from the warrior's grip with a strength born of pure desperation and runs. Shouts follow him, but he doesn't stop, doesn't slow, just pushes through the gate and into the courtyard that he's seen so many times in visions that it feels like returning home. Talmadge Leaper stands in the center of a circle of chains and armed warriors. She's exactly as Scott has seen her, tall and powerful, with dark hair that falls wild around shoulders, marked by glowing crimson runes that writhe and pulse with malevolent light. Her eyes are molten gold, inhuman, and fixed on nothing as her body convulses with transformation. Scott has never seen anything so terrible or so beautiful. The warriors are shouting at him now, weapons raised, but Scott can't hear them over the roar of the curse itself. It screams in his ears, a cacophony of dark magic and binding spells and decade-old rage. He can see its structure laid bare, every thread and knot and anchor point, a masterwork of cruelty. Talmadge's gaze snaps to him. For one moment, their eyes meet across the chaos, and Scott sees the person trapped inside the transformation. Sees her terror and resignation and the last fragments of humanity she's clinging to. He reaches out. His hand makes contact with her arm, just as the transformation reaches its peak. The moment their skin touches, the world explodes into light. Power erupts between them, a surge so violent it throws every nearby warrior off their feet. Scott feels the curse recoil like a living thing, feels it slam against whatever force just manifested through his touch. The crimson runes flare blindingly bright, then suddenly dim, their glow flickering like dying embers. Talmadge gasps, her body jerking as the transformation halts mid-shift. Her eyes, still gold but suddenly clear, lock onto Scott's face with an intensity that steals his breath. The courtyard has gone silent. Every warrior stares in shock at the impossible scene. The curse-consumed pack leader standing human and whole, and the unknown Omega whose hand still rests against her arm, both of them outlined in fading light. Scott's knees buckle. He's used everything he has just to create that moment of interruption, and now there's nothing left. The last thing he sees before darkness takes him is Talmadge's face, her expression transformed from animal rage to something like wonder. Scott wakes in a bed far too soft for someone like him. The ceiling above is stone, unfamiliar, and for several disorienting seconds he can't remember where he is or how he got here. Then memory crashes back. The courtyard, the transformation, the moment his hand touched Talmadge Leaper's arm, and the curse recoiled like a wounded animal. He sits up too quickly and immediately regrets it. His head spins, his body protesting the movement with a wave of nausea that forces him to grip the edge of the mattress until the room stops tilting. Every muscle aches as though he's been beaten. A bone-deep exhaustion that comes from channeling more power than his body was built to contain. The door opens without warning. Talmadge Leaper enters, and the small room suddenly feels smaller, her presence commanding in a way that has nothing to do with the curse and everything to do with who she is beneath it. She's dressed simply, dark trousers and a loose shirt, but she moves like a predator, all controlled strength and coiled readiness. The crimson runes are visible on her forearms, faded now but still present, a constant reminder of what lives beneath her skin. Her eyes, no longer molten gold but a deep amber, fix on him with an intensity that makes Scott want to shrink into the mattress. He forces himself to hold her gaze instead, though it takes more courage than facing down the curse itself. "You're awake." Her voice is deeper than he expected, rough-edged. "Good, we need to talk." Scott's throat is dry. He swallows, trying to find words. "How long was I?" 6 hours. Talmadge crosses her arms, her posture defensive despite her obvious physical advantage. "My healers say you burned through your energy reserves completely. They're surprised you're conscious at all." "I'm hard to kill." The words come out more bitter than Scott intended. A lifetime of being unwanted has made him resilient in ways that don't show. Something flickers across Talmadge's face. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. She pulls a chair close to the bed and sits, the movement deliberately non-threatening despite the authority that radiates from her. "What you did in the courtyard, explain it." "I touched you." The curse responded to, "I know what happened." Impatience sharpens her tone. "I was there. I want to know how." Every practitioner in the territories has tried to break this curse. Shamans, healers, witches who claimed bloodlines older than the packs themselves. None of them could even slow it down. You're an Omega who looks half-starved and smells like 3 days of hard travel. So how did you, in one touch, do what they couldn't manage in 10 years? Scott meets her eyes, seeing the challenge there, the desperate hope she's trying not to show. "Because I don't try to break curses with power. I see them. Their structure, their anchors, the intent that shaped them. When I touched you, I could trace every thread of the working. The curse recoiled because it recognized what I am." "And what are you?" "A curse breaker." The title still feels too large, but Scott forces himself to own it. "It's a gift, a rare one. My grandmother had it, and her grandmother before her. We see the invisible architecture of binding magic and know instinctively how to unravel it." Talmadge leans forward, her elbows on her knees, her gaze never leaving his face. "Can you break mine?" The question hangs between them, weighted with a decade of suffering and the last fragile threads of hope. Scott wants to say yes, wants to promise her salvation, but he's never been good at lying. "I don't know," he admits. "What I did tonight was instinct, not skill. I interrupted the curse, but I didn't break it. Breaking something this complex, this old, this deeply rooted..." He trails off, searching for honesty. "It might kill me. It probably will kill me, and even then I can't guarantee success. But there's a chance. There's a chance." Talmadge is silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stands, her decision clearly made. "You'll stay here, in the fortress. You'll have whatever resources you need, books, supplies, space to work. My healers will monitor your health, and you'll attempt to break this curse before the next blood moon." It's not a request. Scott recognizes the tone of command, the expectation of obedience that comes naturally to someone who's led warriors for years. Part of him wants to resist on principle, to remind her that he's not one of her soldiers to be ordered around. But the larger part remembers the terror in her eyes during the transformation, the desperate grip she had on her humanity, the howl of agony that wasn't entirely animal. She's not commanding him as a superior to an inferior. She's asking for help in the only language she knows how to speak. "One condition," Scott says quietly. Talmadge's eyebrow arches. "You're negotiating?" "If this kills me, when this kills me, you make sure word reaches the southern settlements. I want it known that I tried, that I was more than what they thought I was." Something shifts in her expression, a crack in the armor of authority. For just a moment, Scott sees the person beneath the pack leader, someone who understands what it means to be defined by others' fear and expectations. "You have my word," she says. "Now rest. We start tomorrow." She leaves without waiting for his response, the door closing softly behind her. Scott lies back against the pillows, staring at the stone ceiling, and wonders if he's just agreed to salvation or simply a more purposeful death than the slow fade he left behind. Outside, the blood moon hangs heavy in the sky, already beginning to wane. The ritual chamber sits deep in the fortress, carved from stone that predates the current structure by centuries. Scott stands at its center, surrounded by symbols he's drawn in chalk and ash, his grandmother's journal open on the floor beside him. Talmadge watches from the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You're sure about this?" Her voice echoes slightly in the confined space. Scott isn't sure about anything, but he nods anyway. The only way to break the curse is to understand it completely. That means tracing it back to its source, finding out who cast it and why. The ritual will let me see its full structure. And the cost? My energy, maybe more. He doesn't elaborate on the more. They both know the risks. Talmadge steps into the circle, taking her position at the center as Scott instructed. This close, he can see the fine lines around her eyes, marks of exhaustion that no amount of authority can hide. The crimson runes wind up her arms like vines, dormant now but present, always present. Scott begins to hum, the same melody his grandmother taught him, the one that opens doors between seen and unseen. His hands hover over Talmadge's forearms, not quite touching, feeling for the curse's signature in the air between them. When he finds it, he presses his palms against her skin. The world inverts. Suddenly, Scott is falling through layers of magic, each one revealing itself like pages in a book written in blood and intention. He sees the curse as it was first cast. A ritual performed under a new moon, words spoken in the old tongue, power drawn from sacrifice and sealed with betrayal. The working is masterful, complex beyond anything Scott has encountered, designed not just to transform, but to anchor itself so deeply it becomes inseparable from its victim. He pushes deeper, following the threads back to their source, and sees a face. A man, older, with gray-streaked hair and eyes that burn with zealous certainty. The man stands over a younger Talmadge, barely 20, her wrists bound with ceremonial chains. She's pleading with him, her voice raw with betrayal. "Please, Garrick, don't do this. I'll be better. I'll be stronger. Just don't. You'll never be strong enough as you are." The man's voice carries absolute conviction. "You have potential, Talmadge, but you're too soft, too merciful. The packs need a leader who rules through fear, who cannot be questioned or challenged. This curse will forge you into that leader. You'll thank me when you see what you become." The vision shifts. Scott sees the curse taking hold, sees Talmadge's first transformation under the blood moon, sees her horror as she wakes surrounded by the bodies of wolves she killed while lost to the beast, sees her trying desperately to control it, to maintain her humanity against magic designed specifically to strip it away. 10 years of this. 10 years of fighting a curse cast by someone she trusted, someone who claimed to act in her best interest while destroying her piece by piece. The rage that fills Scott isn't his own. It's borrowed from Talmadge's buried memories, mixed with his own fury at the casual cruelty of it. He pulls back hard, breaking the connection, and collapses to his knees, gasping. Talmadge catches him before he hits the floor completely, her hands surprisingly gentle on his shoulders. "What did you see?" Scott's vision swims, black spots dancing at the edges. He can taste copper in his mouth. "Garrick, your mentor. He cast the curse, he thought." The words come out slurred, exhaustion pulling at him like a riptide. "He thought making you a monster would make you a better leader." The hands on his shoulders tighten, not painfully, but with barely restrained emotion. When Scott manages to focus on Talmadge's face, he sees something raw and broken there, quickly masked, but not quickly enough. "I suspected," she says quietly, "but I couldn't prove it. He disappeared shortly after the curse took hold. No one's seen him in years." "He's alive." Scott forces the words out even as darkness creeps in at the edges of his consciousness. The curse is anchored to something physical, something that still exists. I couldn't see what, but I felt it. As long as the anchor remains, the curse can't be fully broken. Talmadge helps him to a sitting position, her movements careful, as though he's made of something fragile that might shatter with rough handling. It's strange, being treated with care by someone so obviously powerful. Strange and unsettling, and something else Scott doesn't have the energy to name. "You need rest," she says, and there's an edge of command in it, but also something softer. Concern, maybe. "I need to go deeper." Scott tries to stand and immediately sways. Talmadge's arm shoots out, steadying him. "Next time I'll find the anchor. I just need, next time you'll kill yourself." Now the command is unmistakable. "You've done enough for today." Scott wants to argue, but his body has already made the decision for him. His legs give out, and this time when Talmadge catches him, he doesn't have the strength to pretend he can stand on his own. She carries him back to his room without comment, her strength making the task look effortless. As she lays him on the bed, Scott catches her wrist, the gesture weak but insistent. "I'll find it," he promises through the fog of exhaustion. "The anchor. I'll find it and we'll break this curse." Talmadge looks down at him, and for just a moment her expression is completely unguarded. "Don't die trying to save me, Scott Sampson. I've had enough deaths on my conscience." Then she's gone, and Scott is alone with the darkness pulling him under and the echo of her words lingering like a promise neither of them is sure they can keep. Scott spends 3 days recovering before attempting the second ritual. Talmadge sends meals to his room, far more food than he's accustomed to, and her healers check on him with a frequency that suggests her orders were explicit. He eats, sleeps, and studies his grandmother's journal, searching for any guidance on curses this complex. The text offers fragments, warnings about anchors and the danger of confronting practitioners who tie their magic to their own life force. On the 4th morning, Scott returns to the ritual chamber. Talmadge is already there, waiting, her posture tense with anticipation. She's trying to hide behind authority. "You're sure you're ready?" she asks. Scott isn't, but they're running out of time. The next blood moon is 18 days away. "I have to be. This ritual requires more." Scott produces a small knife from his grandmother's pouch, the blade etched with symbols that seem to shift in the lamplight. Talmadge's eyes narrow when she sees it. "Blood magic?" "Connection magic," Scott corrects. "Blood is just the medium. It'll let me go deeper than before, past the curse's structure to its foundation." He doesn't mention that this type of working can create bonds between participants, threads of connection that persist long after the ritual ends. Some things are better discovered than explained. Talmadge extends her arm without hesitation, the gesture speaking to either trust or desperation. Probably both. Scott makes a shallow cut across her palm, then mirrors it on his own. When their bleeding hands clasp together, the magic ignites immediately. This time, Scott doesn't fall through layers, he plummets. The curse opens before him like a chasm, and at its bottom, he sees the truth that's been hidden beneath decade-old bindings and misdirection. A heart, still beating, suspended in darkness and wrapped in preservation spells so intricate they're almost beautiful. Garrick's heart, removed from his body and hidden away, transformed into a phylactery that anchors the curse to the physical world. Scott pushes closer, following the threads that connect the heart to Talmadge, and sees the location imprinted in the magic itself. A sacred grove, 3 days' journey east, where the old trees grow in a circle and the ground remembers older gods. The heart is buried there, protected by wards and guardians, beating in the earth like a second pulse. The vision expands, showing him more. Garrick, still alive despite his missing heart, sustained by the same magic that fuels the curse. He's been watching from a distance all these years, observing his handiwork, waiting to see if Talmadge would become the merciless leader he envisioned, or if the curse would consume her entirely. Either outcome would satisfy him. The rage that floods through Scott is his own this time, pure and burning. He sees the calculated cruelty of it, the way Garrick shaped Talmadge's suffering into a teaching tool, convinced that breaking her would remake her into something stronger. The arrogance of it, the presumption that he had the right to destroy someone in order to rebuild them according to his vision. Scott pulls back from the vision, but the connection between his hand and Talmadge's keeps him tethered. He can feel her now, not just her curse, but her. The exhaustion beneath her strength, the grief she carries for every person she's hurt while transformed, the loneliness of leading while being feared. It's overwhelming, intimate in a way that has nothing to do with bodies and everything to do with souls, laid bare. When Scott finally releases her hand and opens his eyes, he's shaking. Talmadge is watching him, her expression uncertain in a way he's never seen before. "Tell me," she says quietly. Scott wipes blood from his palm onto his trousers, buying time to organize thoughts that feel scattered and raw. The anchor is Garrick's heart. He removed it and hid it in the sacred grove, east of here. As long as it beats, the curse remains. To break you free, we have to destroy it. Talmadge goes very still. His heart. He removed his own heart. The magic sustains him. He's still alive, somewhere watching. Scott's voice hardens. He wanted to see what you'd become, whether the curse would forge you into his vision of a perfect leader, or destroy you completely. He didn't care which, as long as his experiment reached a conclusion. Something breaks in Talmadge's expression, a crack in the armor she's maintained for 10 years. She turns away, her shoulders rigid, and Scott realizes with uncomfortable clarity that she's fighting tears she refuses to shed in front of him. "I trusted him." Her voice is rough, barely controlled. "He trained me from childhood. When my parents died, he became... I thought he cared about me. About who I was, not just what I could become." Scott should stay quiet, should give her privacy to process this betrayal. But the connection forged by the blood ritual is still humming between them, and he can feel her pain as though it's his own. "He was wrong about you. You don't know that." She still won't look at him. "Maybe he saw something I couldn't. Maybe I was too weak, too soft, and this curse was the only way to... No." Scott stands, his legs steadier than they were after the first ritual. He crosses to where Talmadge stands rigid by the wall. "I've seen inside the curse now. I've felt what it does to you. You fight it every single day. Maintain your humanity despite magic designed specifically to strip it away. That's not weakness. That's the opposite of weakness." Talmadge finally turns to face him, and there are tears on her cheeks after all. Silent and furious. Then why does it hurt this much? Why does knowing someone I loved could do this to me feel worse than the curse itself? Scott doesn't have an answer that will make it better. So instead, he does something he's never done in his life. He reaches out and takes her hand, not for ritual or magic, but simply for comfort. Her fingers close around his, gripping tight enough to hurt, and they stand there in the ritual chamber while she cries for the mentor she lost and the betrayal that's poisoned 10 years of her life. When she finally pulls away, wiping her face with her free hand, there's something different between them. The connection forged by blood magic has settled into something deeper, a bond that will tie them together long after the curse is broken, if they survive long enough to break it. "We destroy the heart," Talmadge says, her voice steady again, though her eyes remain red. "We go to the sacred grove and we end this. Scott nods. Together. Together, she agrees, and the word sounds like a vow. The attack comes on the 5th night, when Scott's guard is finally lowered enough to believe he might be safe within the fortress walls. He's in his room, poring over his grandmother's journal by candlelight, when the first wave of wrongness hits him. It's subtle at first, a tingling in his fingertips, a slight heaviness in his limbs that he attributes to exhaustion. Then his vision blurs, the text on the page swimming out of focus, and he realizes with cold clarity that something is very wrong. The wine, the cup sitting half empty on his bedside table, brought by a servant he didn't recognize. Scott tries to stand and his legs buckle immediately, sending him crashing to the floor. The journal skitters away across the stone. His heart hammers erratically in his chest. Too fast and then too slow, his body at war with itself. Poison. The word surfaces through the fog creeping over his thoughts. Someone poisoned the wine. Scott drags himself toward the door, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. He needs to call for help, needs to reach someone before the poison finishes its work. But his voice won't cooperate, emerging as barely a whisper that won't carry beyond the room. The candle flame wavers in his failing vision, and he realizes with detached horror that he's dying. The door slams open. Talmadge stands framed in the entrance, her expression transforming from confusion to fury in the space of a heartbeat. She crosses the room in 3 strides, dropping to her knees beside Scott and pulling him upright with hands that shake despite their strength. What happened? Her voice is sharp, commanding, pulling him back from the edge of consciousness through sheer force of will. Scott tries to answer, but his throat won't work properly. He manages to gesture weakly toward the wine cup. Talmadge follows his gaze, and her expression goes murderous. She shouts for her healers, the sound loud enough to wake half the fortress, then turns her attention back to Scott. Stay with me. Her hands cup his face, forcing him to focus on her eyes instead of the darkness pulling at the edges of his awareness. You don't die here. You don't die before we break this curse. Do you understand me? Scott wants to tell her that understanding doesn't change biology, that poison doesn't care about commands or curses or unfinished business. But her hands are warm against his skin, and her eyes are fierce with a determination that feels almost like a physical force. And somehow that's enough to keep him tethered to consciousness for a few moments longer. The healers arrive in a rush of urgent voices and practiced efficiency. They recognize the symptoms immediately. Nightshade, mixed with something else, something designed to suppress the body's natural defenses. One of them produces a vial of cloudy liquid and forces it between Scott's lips while another begins a chant in the old tongue, words that pull at the poison the way Scott's magic pulls at curses. Talmadge doesn't move from his side. Her hand finds his and grips tight, an anchor in the chaos. Scott holds on with what little strength remains, feeling the poison and the antidote wage war in his bloodstream. His body convulses, trying to purge itself, and Talmadge holds him through it, murmuring words he can't quite hear, but that sound almost gentle. It takes an hour for the crisis to pass. When Scott's breathing finally steadies and his heart finds its normal rhythm, the healers step back with visible relief. Talmadge remains where she is, her hand still wrapped around his, her jaw tight with barely contained rage. Who brought the wine? Her voice is deadly quiet. One of the healers answers. A servant. New to the household, hired 3 weeks ago. We're searching for him now. Find him, and when you do, bring him to me alive. Talmadge's eyes never leave Scott's face. I want to know who sent him. But Scott already knows. The poison was too precise, too specifically designed to kill someone with his particular physiology. Only someone who understood curse-breaking magic, who knew what it did to a practitioner's body, could have crafted something this effective. Garrick, he manages, his voice raw and barely audible. He knows. About the rituals. About what we found. Talmadge's expression goes cold in a way that has nothing to do with lack of emotion and everything to do with fury crystallized into something harder than stone. Then he's made his position clear. This isn't just about breaking a curse anymore. It's war. She finally releases Scott's hand, but only to brush his sweat-dampened hair back from his forehead in a gesture so unexpectedly tender, it steals what little breath he's managed to recover. I won't let him take you. Whatever it costs, whatever I have to do, I will keep you safe until this curse is broken. Scott sees the truth in her eyes, the depth of feeling she's trying to hide behind tactical declarations. Somewhere between the first ritual and now, between blood magic and shared vulnerability, something has shifted between them. The bond forged by necessity has transformed into something neither of them anticipated. Why? The question emerges before Scott can stop it. I'm just an Omega, a nobody who wandered into your territory because of visions I barely understand. Why does it matter so much if I live or die? Talmadge looks at him for a long moment, her expression unguarded in a way he suspects few people ever see. Because you're the first person in 10 years who's looked at me and seen someone worth saving instead of something to be feared. Because when you touch me, the curse quiets. Because... She stops, seemingly struggling with words that don't come naturally to someone who leads through authority rather than confession. Because you matter, Scott Sampson. To this mission. To breaking the curse. To me. The admission hangs between them, vulnerable and powerful in equal measure. Scott should say something, should acknowledge the weight of what she's just confessed. But exhaustion is pulling him under again and the words won't come. Talmadge seems to understand. She pulls a blanket over him, her movements gentle. Rest. I'll have guards posted outside your door. No one enters without my explicit permission. As she moves to leave, Scott catches her wrist with what little strength he's recovered. Thank you for saving me. Thank me after we destroy Garrick's heart, she says, but her hand turns in his grip to squeeze his fingers briefly before letting go. Sleep now. We have a war to prepare for. Garrick arrives at the fortress 3 days after the poisoning attempt, walking through the gates as though he owns them. He's aged since Scott saw him in the vision. Gray hair now fully white, lines carved deep around his mouth. But his eyes still burn with that same zealous certainty. He carries no weapons, no guards, just the absolute confidence of someone who believes himself untouchable. Talmadge receives him in the great hall, flanked by her most trusted warriors. Scott stands to her right, still weak from the poison but refusing to be absent for this confrontation. The bond between them hums with shared tension, a connection that's grown stronger with each passing day. Talmadge? Garrick's voice carries across the hall, warm and paternal, as though the last 10 years never happened. I heard you'd been entertaining visitors. I thought it was time we spoke. Spoke. Talmadge's voice is ice-given sound. Is that what you call it when you send assassins to murder guests under my protection? Garrick's expression doesn't change, doesn't even flicker with surprise at being caught. The Omega was interfering with important work. I simply tried to remove an obstacle. Important work? Scott speaks before he can stop himself, his voice carrying more strength than his body currently possesses. Is that what you call cursing her? Turning her into a monster against her will? Stealing 10 years of her life? Garrick's gaze shifts to Scott for the first time, assessing and dismissive in equal measure. Ah, the curse breaker. I underestimated you, it seems. Most practitioners would have died attempting the rituals you survived. He pauses, tilting his head. A pity my servant failed. It would have saved us all considerable trouble. Talmadge moves before anyone can react, crossing the distance between them in 3 strides and seizing Garrick by the throat. She lifts him effortlessly, her strength enhanced by fury and the curse that still lives beneath her skin. Give me one reason I shouldn't kill you where you stand. Garrick doesn't struggle, doesn't even seem concerned despite the hand cutting off his air. When Talmadge finally drops him, He lands gracefully, straightening his robes with careful dignity. Because you want answers first. You always were too curious for your own good. Then answer. Talmadge's hands curl into fists at her sides, trembling with the effort of restraint. Why? You trained me. You were like a father to me after mine died. Why would you do this? Garrick's expression shifts to something almost sad, as though he's disappointed she hasn't already understood. Because you were weak, Talmadge. Brilliant, yes. Strong, certainly. But weak where it mattered most. You cared too much about being loved, about maintaining peace, about leading through consensus rather than power. He begins to pace, warming to his subject like a teacher delivering a lecture. The packs were fragmenting. Without a strong leader, a truly strong leader, we would have descended into chaos within a generation. I saw that clearly, and I saw that you had the potential to be that leader, if only the softness could be burned away. Scott feels sick listening to this, the casual certainty with which Garrick describes destroying someone he claimed to care about. Beside him, Talmadge has gone very still, the kind of stillness that precedes violence. So you cursed me. Her voice is barely above a whisper. You turned me into the thing I feared most, made me kill my own people while transformed, forced me to live in terror of what I might become. That was your idea of teaching? That was my idea of forging. Garrick stops pacing, facing her directly. Steel must be heated and hammered to achieve its true strength. I gave you a crucible that would either destroy you or transform you into the leader our kind needed. Every month you survived, every transformation you endured, you became harder, more feared, more respected. Look at what you've built here. An unassailable position. Warriors who obey without question. Territories that bow to your authority. That's not despite the curse, Talmadge. That's because of it. You're insane. Scott's voice cuts through the hall. You destroyed her life because of some twisted philosophy about strength through suffering? Garrick turns to him with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. I created the most powerful pack leader in 3 generations. If that's insanity, then perhaps we need more of it. Talmadge's control finally snaps. She moves with speed that blurs the eye, her fist connecting with Garrick's jaw hard enough to send him sprawling. He hits the stone floor and rolls, coming up bloodied but still smiling that terrible smile. There it is, he says, spitting blood. The monster I helped create. You can pretend all you want that you hate what you've become, but we both know the truth. The curse gave you permission to be what you always wanted to be but were too afraid to embrace, a predator, a force of nature, a leader who doesn't negotiate or compromise but simply dominates. You're wrong. Talmadge's voice shakes with emotion barely contained. Everything I've built, I built in spite of you, in spite of this curse. Every day I fight to remain human, to lead with something other than fear, to be better than what you tried to make me. And I've succeeded, not because of your torture, but because I refuse to let it define me. Garrick rises slowly, wiping blood from his mouth. Then prove it. Face me in ritual combat, as tradition dictates. If you win, you can destroy my heart and break your curse. If I win, the Omega dies and you accept that everything I did was necessary. He spreads his arms, the gesture almost mocking. Unless you're afraid that without the curse, you're nothing but the weak girl I started with. The challenge hangs in the air, designed to provoke exactly the response it gets. Talmadge's eyes flash gold for just a moment, the curse responding to her rage, before she forces them back to amber through sheer will. I accept, she says, her voice steady again, cold with purpose. Tomorrow at dawn, in the ritual circle. And when I defeat you, Garrick, I'll make sure everyone knows that your grand experiment was nothing but cruelty dressed up as teaching. Garrick bows, the gesture laced with mockery. I look forward to seeing what you've truly become, my dear student, with or without the curse's help. He turns and walks from the hall, escorted by warriors who look like they'd rather drag him in chains. The moment he's gone, Talmadge's shoulders sag slightly, the weight of the confrontation finally showing. Scott moves to her side, his hand finding hers. Through their bond, he feels the storm of emotions she's containing. Rage and grief and a terrible, aching hurt that comes from having the depths of betrayal confirmed. "You don't have to do this," he says quietly. "We can destroy the heart without ritual combat. We can—" "No." Talmadge's fingers tighten around his. He needs to understand that he failed, that all his torture and manipulation produced nothing but suffering. The only way to make him understand is to defeat him on his own terms. Scott nods, understanding even as dread pools in his stomach. Tomorrow at dawn, everything will be decided. One way or another, this ends. The sacred grove stands ancient and watchful. Trees so old their trunks have grown wider than 3 men standing shoulder to shoulder. Their branches weave overhead in patterns that seem deliberate, forming a living cathedral that blocks out most of the sky. What little light penetrates shows crimson. The blood moon is rising, right on schedule, indifferent to the battle about to be fought beneath it. Scott feels the curse stirring in Talmadge as they enter the grove, responding to the moon's pull with hungry anticipation. The crimson runes on her arms begin to glow faintly, and he sees her jaw tighten with the effort of maintaining control. They have perhaps an hour before the transformation becomes inevitable. Garrick waits at the grove's center, standing over a patch of earth that pulses with barely contained power. Scott can see the magic even without ritual, threads of dark energy rising from the ground like heat shimmer, all converging on the spot where the heart lies buried. Garrick looks older in the blood moon's light, more fragile, but his eyes burn with the same unshakable conviction. "I hoped you'd reconsider," he says, his voice carrying easily in the unnatural quiet of the grove. "But I suppose some lessons must be learned the hard way." Talmadge doesn't respond with words. She simply begins to circle, her movements predatory, keeping herself between Garrick and Scott. The message is clear. If he wants to stop the ritual, he'll have to go through her first. Scott drops to his knees at the edge of the circle, pulling ritual components from his pack with hands that tremble slightly. He has one chance at this. The heart is buried deep, protected by wards Garrick spent years perfecting. But Scott has traced the curse's structure through blood and pain and shared suffering. He knows its weaknesses, the precise points where pressure will cause the whole working to collapse. He begins to chant, words in the old tongue flowing from his lips like water finding a course. The earth responds, magic answering magic, and Scott feels the heart begin to pulse faster beneath the soil, sensing the threat. Garrick moves then, launching himself towards Scott with speed that belies his age. Talmadge intercepts him mid-stride, her shoulder driving into his chest and sending them both crashing to the ground. They roll apart and come up fighting, and Scott forces himself to focus on the ritual, even as the sounds of their combat fill the grove. The heart fights him. Scott can feel it actively resisting, the wards around it flaring to life and pushing back against his magic. He presses harder, pouring more of himself into the working, and feels something inside him begin to tear. Blood runs from his nose, copper hot on his lips. His vision blurs, but he doesn't stop chanting. Can't stop, because Talmadge is buying him time with her body and her pain, and he will not waste that sacrifice. Behind him, Talmadge and Garrick exchange blows that would shatter bones in anyone less resilient. Garrick fights with the precision of a master, decades of experience in every movement. But Talmadge fights with desperate fury, and the strength of the curse beginning to wake in her blood. The blood moon climbs higher, and Scott sees her eyes flash gold more frequently, the transformation creeping closer with each passing minute. "You can't win this!" Garrick's shout cuts through the night as he dodges one of Talmadge's strikes. "The curse is part of you now. Even if he destroys the heart, you'll never be free of what you've become." "Then I'll live with that." Talmadge's voice is raw, half-human already. "But I'll live with it on my terms, not yours." Scott's chant reaches its crescendo. He drives his hands into the earth, channeling everything he has directly into the ground, reaching for the heart that beats beneath soil and stone and wards. His fingers find purchase on something that shouldn't be touchable, and power explodes through him with enough force to stop his own heart for a terrifying moment. The curse recognizes what he's attempting and turns its full attention on him. Dark magic slams into Scott's body like a physical blow, tearing through channels that weren't meant to hold this much power. He screams, the chant breaking, and feels the ritual beginning to collapse. He's not strong enough. Even knowing the curse's weaknesses, even with all his grandmother's teachings, he simply doesn't have enough power to overcome wards this strong. Through the agony, Scott feels the bond between him and Talmadge flare to life. It's been growing stronger every day, fed by blood magic and shared vulnerability, and feelings neither of them has fully acknowledged. And now it blazes like a beacon in his awareness. He reaches for it instinctively, desperately, and feels Talmadge's strength flood into him. She feels it too. Scott senses her awareness snap to him even as she fights Garrick, feels her understanding of what he needs and her absolute willingness to give it. The bond deepens, transforms, becomes something that will tie them together for as long as they both live. A mate bond, forged not in ceremony, but in desperate necessity, and choice freely given. Power flows through the connection. Talmadge's strength combining with Scott's knowledge, two incomplete halves suddenly made whole. Scott renews his chant, his voice stronger now, fed by something greater than his individual power. His hands close around the phantom sensation of the heart, and he squeezes. Garrick's scream echoes through the grove. He staggers, clutching at his chest, his face going gray with shock and pain. No, you can't. Scott squeezes harder, channeling every ounce of power the bond provides into crushing the heart that has sustained Curse and Castor for 10 years. He feels it rupture, feels dark magic begin to hemorrhage into the earth, and knows with absolute certainty that he's dying. This much power wasn't meant to flow through a human body. His channels are burning, his blood feels like acid, and something fundamental inside him is breaking apart. But the heart is breaking too. Garrick collapses, his body convulsing as the magic sustaining him fails. Talmadge stands over him, her transformation halted mid-shift, watching her former mentor die with an expression that holds no triumph, only exhaustion and grief. The crimson runes on her arms flare blindingly bright one final time, then fade completely, leaving unmarked skin behind. The curse breaks with a sound like shattering glass that only Scott can hear, its pieces dissolving into nothing. 10 years of suffering finally coming to an end. Scott releases the ruined heart and collapses backward onto the ground. His vision is fading, darkness creeping in from all sides, but he manages a smile. They did it. The curse is broken. Talmadge is free. The last thing he sees before consciousness leaves him is Talmadge's face above his, her eyes fully human and filled with terror, her hands pressing against his chest as though she can hold his life inside his body through sheer force of will. Then there's only darkness, and the distant echo of someone screaming his name. Scott wakes to warmth and the sound of a heartbeat that isn't his own. He's cradled against Talmadge's chest, her arms wrapped around him with a fierceness that suggests she hasn't let go since the grove. The room around them is unfamiliar, larger than his previous quarters, with windows that let in genuine sunlight rather than the gray light he's grown accustomed to. You're awake. Talmadge's voice is rough, scraped raw from what sounds like hours of crying. Finally. Your healers said you'd wake yesterday? Then the day before that? I was starting to think. She cuts herself off, her arms tightening fractionally. Scott tries to speak and manages only a croak. Talmadge immediately reaches for a cup of water, helping him drink with a gentleness that sits strangely on someone so powerful. When he can finally form words, what comes out is, the curse? Gone. Something breaks in Talmadge's expression, years of tension finally releasing. completely gone. I felt it shatter when you destroyed the heart. Garrick died in the grove, and I haven't felt even a whisper of transformation since. She touches her forearm, where the crimson runes used to writhe, the skin now unmarked and whole. You did it, Scott. You freed me. We did it. Scott's voice is getting stronger, though his body still feels like it's been torn apart and inexpertly reassembled. I couldn't have finished without the bond, without you. Talmadge's expression shifts to something complicated, a mix of emotions Scott can't quite parse through the exhaustion still clouding his thoughts. About that, the bond. You know what it means? Scott nods slightly. His grandmother's journal had been clear on this point, even if she'd warned against it. A mate bond forged in desperation, and blood magic becomes permanent, tying two souls together in ways that transcend simple partnership. We're mates now, bound for life. I didn't ask your permission. Talmadge's voice carries guilt. In the grove, when you reached for strength through our connection, I gave everything without considering the consequences. You might have survived without forming the mate bond. I didn't give you that choice. Scott manages a weak laugh that turns into a cough. I reached for you first. If anyone forced this bond, it was me. And I'd do it again. He meets her eyes, finding the strength to be honest despite his vulnerability. Even before the grove, Talmadge, I would have chosen this. Her breath catches. You barely know me. I know you fight to stay human despite magic designed to strip your humanity. I know you carry guilt for every person hurt while you were transformed. I know you're trying to lead with something other than fear, even when fear would be easier. Scott's hand finds hers, their fingers intertwining with a familiarity that feels both new and ancient. I know enough. Talmadge leans down and kisses him, the gesture soft and careful, as though he's something precious that might break. When she pulls back, there are tears on her cheeks again. I love you. I need to say that clearly, without ritual or magic or life or death stakes. I love you, Scott Sampson. I love you too. The words feel enormous, too big for his chest to contain. Though I should warn you, I'm a terrible choice for a pack leader's mate. I have no status, no connections, and until a week ago, I was living in a shack that most people pretended didn't exist. Then it's fortunate I'm not most people. Talmadge smiles, the expression transforming her face into something radiant. And you're wrong about having no status. Not anymore. Before Scott can ask what she means, the door opens and warriors file in, dozens of them, filling the room until they line the walls. Scott recognizes the scarred woman from the gate, along with the healers who saved him from poisoning, and faces he's seen around the fortress but never spoken to. They all watch him with expressions ranging from curiosity to respect to something that might be awe. Talmadge rises, lifting Scott in her arms, despite his half-hearted protest that he can walk. She carries him to the window, positioning them so the assembled warriors can see clearly, and her voice rings out with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. This is Scott E. Sampson, Cursebreaker and my mate. He freed me from a curse that your strongest practitioners couldn't touch. He survived poisoning, ritual magic that should have killed him, and the destruction of a working 10 years in the making. She pauses, her gaze sweeping the room. And as of this moment, he is your co-leader, my equal in authority and in status. Any who wish to challenge this can speak now. Silence. Then, one by one, the warriors bow their heads in acknowledgement. The scarred woman is first, her gesture of respect unmistakable, and the others follow until every person in the room has accepted Scott's elevation from outcast to leader. Scott feels something shift inside him, a confidence that has nothing to do with status and everything to do with finally being seen. The bond with Talmadge hums with shared emotion, and he realizes his abilities have changed too. He can sense the curse marks on several warriors, minor workings that cling like shadows, and knows instinctively how to unravel them. The near-death experience has transformed him, refined his gift into something stronger and more controlled. Together, Talmadge says quietly, meant only for him, we'll build something better than what came before, strength tempered with compassion, power balanced with mercy, a place where outcasts can become leaders and monsters can remember their humanity. Scott looks out the window at the territories stretching beyond the fortress walls, at the possibilities opening before them like roads not yet traveled. Together, he agrees, and the word sounds like a promise of everything they'll become. The blood moon is gone, the curse is broken. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future holds something other than survival. It holds hope. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.